Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Inter-SC Trades and Regional Markets Working Group to discuss the draft final proposal that was posted on September 5th. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Today's slide deck presentation is also available on the initiative webpage. Just a reminder, you can get to that page by going to ISO.com, and then under the Stakeholder Center tab on the home page, you'll see Policy Initiatives. If you click that link, it'll take you out to our main initiative landing page where you can search for the initiative webpage. This meeting is being recorded and the video file will be posted to the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And if you need any technical assistance at any point during the meeting, please do send a chat to Inteller Events, the event host. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and you can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen. Or if you joined audio only, you can press *3 on your device. For everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking. And you may also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or to me directly. This here is a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder process. We're currently here where the arrow's pointing in the draft final proposal stage, right after the straw proposal was posted and before the final proposal. Today's agenda will include a discussion on the Inter-SC Trades draft final proposal, followed by a discussion on stakeholder comments that were received after the previous stakeholder call on the straw proposal. And afterwards, we will wrap up with our next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Milos.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us again on the discussion on Inter-SC Trades and Regional Markets. Today, we're going to go over the draft final proposal, which we published last week, that effectively extends the same proposal in light of the stakeholder comments to extend the Inter-SC Trade functionality for Inter-SC Trades of energy to EIM and EDAM area. So we'll start with a bit of an overview again to get us grounded on what are Inter-SC Trades, how do they function, what are different types of Inter-SC Trades of energy, physical and those at the aggregate pricing nodes. We'll cover that a bit. It's a bit of a rehash from the last meeting, but just to get us grounded on it. And then we'll spend a little bit of time reviewing some of the comments that did come in or clarifications from the stakeholders in the last round of comments on the straw proposal. And we'll wrap up with next steps. But by all means, feel free to ask questions as we go through this, and we're happy to answer that. And we'll lay out in the next step section when we're going to the board as well. You may have seen that in the proposal that we're going to be going to the September board for this item. So starting with just a bit of an overview on this slide to get us grounded again on Inter-SC Trades. These are an optional market feature. This is not something that parties are required to undertake or to enter into SC Trades, but an optional market feature that facilitates settlements between scheduling coordinators to meet some of the aspects of their bilateral contractual arrangements that they may have in place. Inter-SC Trades have no impact, no effect on the market optimization, the market awards or schedules, or market dispatch. They're purely a kind of a settlement tool, effectively. And I do want to highlight that we received the stakeholder comments on the straw proposal, and they supported the proposed direction of the proposal to extend those Inter-SC Trades of energy, that functionality, to EIM and EDAM areas. And we retained that proposal here in the draft final proposal that we published last week. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, just a bit of background again on Inter-SC Trades to get us grounded. As I mentioned, they're an optional market settlement feature that facilitates meeting certain aspects of bilateral contractual arrangements between parties. You can have effectively two parties that are represented by a scheduling coordinator that may have entered into a bilateral contract between the parties. Those bilateral contracts may have provisions on the disposition of certain market revenues. To the extent that they do, the Inter-SC Trades provides the option that instead of settling some of these, for example, some of the settlements of energy at a particular generator with the scheduling coordinator for the generator, the inter-SC trade can facilitate and indicate to the market that that should be settled with a different scheduling coordinator that's party to the agreement, for example, with the scheduling coordinator representing the load. And that facilitates settlement of certain bilateral contractual obligations through the allocation of the market settlements to the appropriate scheduling coordinator. Again, it's an optional feature, so parties can continue to settle bilateral aspects of their contracts outside of the market. This is a feature that maybe for convenience could support in some instances, the allocation of that settlement to the appropriate party dictated by the bilateral contract. But again, parties can continue to do that as they've done to date outside of the market to the extent that they want to do that as well. The inter-SC trades, depending on the type of trade, and in this context for what we've proposed, the inter-SC trades of energy, those can be effectuated either in the day-ahead or in the real-time market. So that feature would be available both in the day-ahead and the real-time market. If we go to the next slide, please. So just to focus a little bit on the draft final proposal, which is unchanged compared to the straw proposal that we published originally and discussed at the last stakeholder meeting, but we're proposing to extend that inter-SC trades functionality for inter-SC trades of energy to EIM and EDAM balancing areas. We recognize that EIM and EDAM entities, they have different scheduling coordinators participating in those areas, and they may find value in certain instances, depending on those bilateral arrangements. They may find value in this optional settlement functionality of inter-SC trades of energy. In EDAM, loads and resources all are participating in the market. They're submitting bids into the market, and the parties may find value in inter-SC trades of energy at those physical locations or at the different aggregation points. And similarly in the EIM, while we have participating and non-participating resources in the EIM, some parties may find value in effectuating inter-SC trades associated with participating resources or participating generation that's explicitly modeled and has an LMP at the particular location where the resource is located. We go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit more about inter-SC trades of energy, as we've covered this at the last call as well, but inter-SC trades of energy can occur at either physical locations or at aggregation points. To the extent that they are physical trades, which means that they're occurring at the location where the generator is physically located at that particular pricing nodes, parties can enter into those inter-SC trades at that particular P node of the physical generator. And in the EIM, we would expect that this would be available at locations of participating resources that are associated with those pricing nodes. In terms of the other option within inter-SC trades of energy, this is inter-SC trades that can occur at the aggregate pricing nodes or APNs. And these are not necessarily backed by specific physical resources, but occur at those modeled trading hubs or APNs or load aggregation points that are modeled in our system in the particular balancing area. I'll note that inter-SC trades today are a feature of the ISO. They are available within the ISO day-ahead and the real-time markets. Parties do use those fairly frequently to facilitate settlement of certain bilateral arrangements. And they're not a feature of the EIM and the EDAM today. And so this proposal will extend that availability of the functionality to EIM and EDAM areas. And that will be commensurate with the launch of EDAM, because we do need to make certain technology enhancements, technology tweaks that are not extensive, but nevertheless are incorporated within the EDAM project. And so the functionality, if approved by the board and if approved by FERC, the functionality would be available commensurate with the EDAM launch in May of 2026. If we can go to the next slide. just wanted to highlight again, we had this slide in the prior presentation, but again, to indicate to folks that are interested maybe in this functionality and are starting to think about its value and utilization, that the inter-SC trades are effectuated through the cyber tool that hopefully EIM and future EDAM entities are well familiar with, as well as scheduling coordinators today. But that's all done within the existing cyber tool. There are special sections where parties can go and effectuate these inter-SC trades, and that would be true as well for EIM and EDAM areas, that they would have the ability to enter into cyber and then select the appropriate location for the effectuation of that inter-SC trade between the scheduling coordinators that may be party to that inter-SC trade. If we can go one more slide. And I'll pause after this slide for any kind of questions on just the background on what inter-SC trades are and how they work. The next set of slides will be on responding to some of the stakeholder comments. But just to note that inter-SC trades of energy are subject to certain validation rules. There are general validations that occur at the onset that check that both scheduling coordinators that are party to the inter-SC trade have submitted consistent information between them to effectuate that trade, that they've identified the same location, the parties have identified each other mutually, and that's a general validation that occurs at the beginning of the process. And this is true for both physical and aggregate pricing node trades. Then there's another validation that effectively is a submittal screening that checks that the submitted physical trade, physical inter-SC trade of energy occurring at that physical location does not exceed the Pmax of the identified generating unit, and that's just an initial screening validation that occurs as well. We also have pre-market validations for physical trades that compares the total megawatt quantity of the submitted trades at the particular P node of that physical generator and compares it to the amount of the bid to make sure that the bids can support the physical inter-SC trades that have been identified at the location. And then subsequently, after the market has run, there are post-market validations that check that the generating unit schedule that has emerged from the market can support those physical trades. To the extent that the schedule is below the physical trades, the physical trade is adjusted to match the schedule, and then the remaining amount of that trade is then converted to a trade that is settled at the trading hub that may be associated with that particular resource. But there are certain post-market validations that occur that the schedules can support the inter-SC trades that have been identified at that physical location. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll pause here. Let's pause here just for some logistics, some questions on inter-SC trades in general. We've answered some of those questions in the last stakeholder meeting as well on how inter-SC trades work, but to the extent there are any questions on some of the background and the proposal itself, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. Otherwise, in the next section, we'll move to responding to some of the stakeholder comments received.
First in the queue for questions, we have call-in user 6.
Hello, this is Alvis Remote at PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Great, thank you. Just for education on this, a couple of questions. Number one, are the aggregate pricing nodes for external WEM entities, are they currently defined?
Pricing nodes in the EIM, do you know?
The aggregate pricing nodes.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the pricing nodes are there.
Alva, this is George. If it's a generator location or a trading hub for generator locations, if that's your question.
I'm just wondering whether the AP nodes that the settlement will be done at, are they already defined in the system?
Yes, it has to be defined in the system, has to be one of the defined nodes, but we can define nodes like that if it's in accordance with the tariff.
So the AP nodes, specifically the AP nodes, are they currently defined? I'm sure they can be defined. Are they currently defined or received?
For the IMBAAs you're asking?
Yes.
During the onboarding process, we will look into if there are additional definitions that need to be defined. So I will consider that setup work that we do during the onboarding process after we roll this out. And for existing IMBAAs, if there is a request to create an APN for use with the IST trades, it's just a matter of setting it up in the master file. The system will pick it up.
Okay, so I'll take that as they may not exist yet. You have to understand how to set them up. Will the prices? I'm sort of assuming, but I just want to ask the question: will the AP node prices be published in Oasis?
Yes, of course. We publish all the P-node, AP node prices. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And then one last question was: is there any difference in terms of here, just in WEM entity? Are there and I'm pretty sure it's not the case, but I just want to make sure there's no. Maybe your wording there made me wonder too. Is the set of nodes for an EM entity, WEM entity, potentially not all of the supply nodes in the BAA, or should it represent essentially all of the supply in the BAA and essentially be a weighted price for all of the P nodes within the BAA?
You're thinking of a custom AP node that doesn't include all the generating sources? That is possible. Right. Yeah, that is possible because certain participants may want to group their generators into an AP node for using it with inter-SC trades. So as long as there is no provision in the tariff that prevents that, we don't see a problem with it.
Okay, and then that creation of that AP node, there'll be some, obviously, whatever your procedure is now for creating custom aggregate pricing nodes is used in determining who has control over the definition of that node and what's excluded or what's included in that AP node is what you're saying basically.
Yes, there is a large level of flexibility when defining these elements for the inter-SC trades. The reason is that they don't interact with the market. They're ex-post financial settlements, basically, so they don't affect the market, how the market runs, operates, or calculates its optimal solution. So we have a certain latitude for, defining these instruments to, if participants want to use them in a certain way.
My only comment might be that at least when there are EDEM participants, you might want to have some sort of baseline AP node defined for each BAA, since the data will be published on Oasis, something that does represent the sort of in the same way that the CAISO's trading hubs represent, the weighted supply LMPs. You might want to consider having those defined by default rather than simply creating these all according to custom requests. But that's just a comment. Thank you, George. I appreciate your clarifications.
We already have one. I mean, the default generator aggregation point is one that, is used for various reasons, even in the market, for distribution of schedules. So I think this is preserved when an entity becomes EDEM. So it will always be available, at least that.
Okay, and those nodes are already defined and already in Oasis.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Alva, on where these are located, on Oasis they can be found under the Atlas reference, and then there's different aggregation point sections that can be viewed, and in there you can see the definition as well of each of those AP nodes. That all becomes public and transparent on Oasis, how these are defined.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So in a sense, you're just enabling something that in fact can already be done based on data that's visible in OASIS. So,
Yeah, thank you.
thank you.
There are currently no other questions in the queue, but just a reminder to everyone that if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand by going to the bottom right of the participant panel, or you can send questions via chat.
Okay, and you know, we'll pause for questions again throughout the conversation, so feel free to, if you're still thinking of questions, feel free to raise them later as well. But let's go to the section on stakeholder comments. If we can go to the next slide, please. We did receive 6 sets of stakeholder comments, written comments, and all of them are supportive of the extension of inter-SC trades of energy functionality to EIM and EDAM areas. I did want to highlight a couple of questions from stakeholders on the next 2 slides. We responded to them as well within the draft final proposal. There's a section 3 that recognizes different sets of comments and some of the clarification questions, but we wanted to also take the opportunity to respond to them here in case folks had any follow-ups or additional questions. Direct Energy did, we mentioned this at the last call, but Direct Energy requested confirmation that inter-SC trade functionality for inter-SC trades at NGRs or non-generating resources like storage resources will become available, and our response, and we've noted this in the draft final proposal as well, is that we are working on that functionality. That's independent of this particular initiative. We're working on enhancements to systems to support inter-SC trades and NGRs. This was, I think it was always the intent to enable it when the model was created for NGRs, but we're getting to now enabling inter-SC trade functionality at those NGRs, and that's independent of this effort, and it's slated for summer of 2025 implementation at this stage. So keep Direct Energy and others that are interested, keep a lookout for that. We do have different forums where you can follow and stay up to date on how this and other efforts are progressing. We have, for example, bi-weekly release user group meetings that talk about different system enhancements that are coming up, that are being worked on. So that's one potential venue where you can stay up to date, but we'll also have a wider communication once that functionality is ready to be implemented. And once that's enabled, to the extent that this initiative is approved, that same functionality would extend to EIM and EDAM areas where there could be inter-SC trades of energy at those particular locations as well. But again, that effort of the systems enhancements is not necessarily something being proposed by this initiative. It's being worked independent of that. Then we did have suggestions that we wanted to highlight from WPTF, that they suggested thorough testing of the inter-SC trade functionality that we're talking about here, to the extent that this is approved both by our board and the Western Energy Markets governing body, and then FERC subsequently. And yes, we're committed to this functionality being tested. It will be, because it will be part of the wider EDAM project, it will be part of the market simulation that is slated for EDAM. This is one of the enhancements that's part of that effort. But that market simulation, it's an extended period, but it's slated for September through December of next year. And parties and the ISO as well will have the opportunity to test not only the inter-SC trade functionality, but also the EDAM functionality that will be in place at that time and available for testing ahead of go live. So there'll be opportunities to test this, and similar to the existing market simulation processes, there'll be stakeholder meetings on that. There'll be opportunities, to the extent that folks identify technology issues, that things are not working as expected, there'll be ability to identify that and correct it to the extent needed. Let's go to the next slide, and then we'll pause for questions after the next slide, after this slide as well. WPTF also, in its comments, encouraged the ISO to ensure that these APNs are created transparently and consistently, and I think that gets to the question that Alva raised, so that kind of Alva got to it ahead of this question, but as we noted for Alva, these APNs are and will continue to be established transparently, working with the parties that have noted those or try to establish those, and the balancing areas as well. These are defined on our OASIS page, and pricing is transparent as well to these. But folks that are interested in different APNs that we already have on the established within the ISO, you can go to our OASIS page under the Atlas reference, click on that. There should be a section there for aggregate pricing nodes and definition of the points on the system. And if you find the particular one, you'll be able to see how these are defined on our OASIS. And we would do the same process and extend that same transparency to EIM and EDAM areas. And then finally, another comment that WPTF raised was that noted that some prospective EDAM entities may represent load-serving entities within their balancing area as the EDAM entity scheduling coordinator, effectively representing the load within the balancing area. And there may not be individual, or there may be limited individual load-serving entities that represent their load as the scheduling coordinator, which they know may limit the ability to effectuate these inter-SC trades. And what we've noted in the proposal, in the draft final proposal and here as well, is that under the EDAM design, the entities have the ability to work with their stakeholders to establish the scheduling coordinator relationship structure through their own stakeholder processes. For the ISO part, as the market operator, we can support different scheduling coordinator structures as well as inter-SC trades associated with these different scheduling coordinator structures. To the extent the load-serving entities elect to represent themselves as the load scheduling coordinator in the market, that's fairly straightforward. Those inter-SC trades can be executed with them. To the extent that EDAM entity scheduling coordinator represents multiple loads within the balancing area, that also can be accommodated, and there can be, for those scheduling coordinators that operate in the market today, there are different scheduling coordinator IDs that can be defined for different loads that the EDAM entity represents or any other third-party scheduling coordinator represents. And it is between those scheduling coordinator IDs that inter-SC trades can be effectuated. So the EDAM entities have the ability, again, to establish that scheduling coordinator relationship structure, and there's opportunities to the inter-SC trades can be compatible with any of those structures working with that entity to establish those. But let me pause here and see if there are any questions on any of these questions or any other questions that folks may want to raise.
First in the queue, we have a hand raised by Callie Wells.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Callie. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So actually, I just wanted to provide some clarification on a point we made in our written comments. It's not one that you guys highlighted here, but you did respond in the paper, and I really appreciate the responses you guys provided. But I think based on the response in the paper that maybe we weren't as clear in our comments as we could have been, and the point we were trying to make didn't necessarily come through as intended. So if it's okay, I just wanted to provide clarification here.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So yeah, we completely understand that inter-SC trades are not a direct congestion risk hedging mechanism. I think during the last call, there was some discussion around how inter-SC trades, if you have one like at an AP node that's halfway between like the load and the gen, they essentially split the congestion cost between the two entities. And then obviously if one of the entities want to further directly hedge their congestion risk between, for example, the gen and the AP node, they would have to use something like CRRs in the CAISO BAA or some other hedging mechanism. Obviously in EDAM, day one CRRs are not available for all entities, but I think the point we were trying to make in our comments was that having very transparently and consistently defined AP nodes will further help support a more consistent congestion cost hedging mechanism like CRRs down the road, because you can then kind of pair these inter-SC trades alongside I'm just going to use CRRs just because that's what we're more familiar with in the CAISO, you know, a CRR framework. So you can actually get more usefulness out of these inter-SC trades. So we were just really making the point of, you know, as we go through this conversation and this discussion to kind of look forward to other use cases and try and establish this policy in a way that will really help bring additional value into the inter-SC trades down the road. So that was the point that we were trying to make. And again, we probably could have been a little bit more clear in our comments on that. So it's really kind of looking more towards that and looking at other use cases too.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. That makes sense. Yes, I think that point makes sense. Thank you so much for clarifying.
All right, great. Thanks.
There are currently no other questions in the queue.
Okay. Let's go then to the next slide, and we'll just talk about next steps, and then we'll pause for questions again. If we can go one more slide. Okay, so we're requesting stakeholder comments on the draft final proposal here by the 16th. I think that's next Monday, if I've got it right. And we're proposing also to move this item to the September joint session of the ISO Board of Governors and the Western Energy Markets Governing Body meeting, and which is just a few weeks away. And the main reason we're doing this is, again, in light of the supportive stakeholder comments that we received, that doesn't appear to be a controversial issue, and if we can get a decision earlier, that will help us also expedite the process and filing at FERC. It's going to help support our implementation efforts and prioritizing the functionality changes here within EDAM. The earlier that we can get that certainty on implementation, that this is moving forward, the better. We also recognize that some parties will find value in this in EDAM and in EIM, and the earlier that we can provide that certainty as well, not only through our decision at the board, but also at FERC, I think it provides certainty for them in terms of the features that will be available within the markets in 2026. So we're proposing to expedite this to the September 26th board meeting in light of those supportive comments and in light of the certainty that we're looking to get earlier than later, both from the board as well from the FERC. And if this is approved by the board, we will look to file it with FERC. I think we're targeting, we will look to publish the draft tariff language here fairly soon, either prior to the board meeting or soon thereafter, and start that stakeholder process to the extent that the board approves this proposal. And then we will look to file, if all goes well, in the mid-October timeframe. And then that will help facilitate the implementation activities, and this will be in conjunction with the implementation effort for EDAM that is underway, and the functionality then would be enabled and available with the launch of EDAM in May of 2026. So we recognize that the timeline for comments is a bit shorter, but in light of I think the supportive comments and the supportive direction from stakeholders on this, we think that we can move this to the September board, and we'll look forward to your comments on the 16th. And John, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, since we have, most folks here, that as you might imagine, the tariff process will be fairly concise, and the good news there is that the changes necessary to support this proposal to the tariff are very straightforward. There's currently two provisions, one in section 33.28 and the other in section 29.28 for EDAM and WEIM respectively, and those paragraphs currently preclude inter-SC trades in the WEIM and EDAM, and this amendment would of course open that up to inter-SC trades of energy in those areas, and thus the tariff language itself will be very straightforward. So I just wanted to let you all know that. We'll come out with a schedule here soon. I think the timeline that Milos outlined holds. We'll publish tariff, and we'll do that at or around the board meeting, and then get this submitted in mid-October to the commission, you know, assuming all the approvals in between here and there. Thanks.
So Christina, I think we can pause for questions here as well, if we have any at this point.
We have call-in user 6.
Oh, Mustafa Svoboda again. It's basically just, I wanted to express support for the idea that you're basically entraining this with the 3 other initiatives that are going live at the same time, DANE, EDAM, and the ISO BAA. And certainly to the extent that you can treat them as sort of a unitary set that will assist in our preparations, you know, both in terms of software development and testing and allocation of resources. So I really support your trying to treat it as essentially one more piece now of EDAM that's being recognized as will be valuable to have in place at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alva. Yeah, that's the plan, and that's the reason is grouping all of these so it can support not only on our side, but on your side as well, the implementation and testing. Any more questions, Christina?
Currently, no other hands are raised.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, just briefly. This is a remnant from the last presentation as well, but to the extent that stakeholders are, you know, those that are not familiar with InterSC trades, these are just some helpful reference documents to familiarize yourself, maybe a little early in light of the fact that if approved, this would go in 2026, but just so you have it for posterity, you've got some reference documents here that provide context and background on the procedures associated with these, how these work today, and some of the user guides that help you visualize how to submit and effectuate these InterSC trades. So with that, just want to thank again everybody for bearing with us through this and for the support. We look forward to your comments on the 16th, and I'll turn it over to you, Christina, for some additional announcements.
Thanks, Milos. Now for some announcements. For insights into the ISO grid and market operations, you can be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see the latest blog posts. The first one is the DOE grant boosting grid enhancing tech, and another one on 20-year transmission outlook, and then another on a new Energy Matters podcast. Next, we'd like to remind you of the policy initiatives timeline. The ISO launched this timeline to give stakeholders an overview of ongoing policy initiatives, and it really offers details such as the initiative status, timelines, and the current phase of the stakeholder engagement process. And we make updates to it weekly, and you can find it on the Policy Initiatives landing page. For more information, you can always email us at ISO Stakeholder Affairs. And we'd also like to remind you that registration is open for the 2024 Stakeholder Symposium. You can visit the event website for additional information. Next, we'd like to remind you to please save the date for the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair on September 17th. Just a reminder, this will provide stakeholders with an opportunity to learn more about the ISO's interconnection process, as well as recent changes affecting Cluster 15. And the deadline to register is approaching. If you plan to attend in person, please register by September 13th. And stakeholders are encouraged to submit questions in advance, which will be addressed during the meeting. This can be done by emailing us at isostakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. And lastly, the ISO would like all UAAs to actively begin replacing your user and business certificates to entrust certificates. The due date for this is the end of October of this year. And you can email UAA requests at CAISO.com, or you can always create a city ticket if you have any questions. And with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. And with that, we thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Call has concluded. You may now disconnect.